Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by two returning guests, Will Tanner of the American Tribune and Ian Burlingame. Gentlemen, how are you doing this morning?
Good, how are you? Splendid.
All good here, thank you. First ever
Yeah.
three-way conversation on the Contrarian Capitalist, so we'll see how it goes. And we have, as always, plenty to talk about, and I'm sure this conversation's going to go in many different directions. I thought the good place to start, if it's okay with you, Ian, you've been working very, very hard recently on a book. So if you can, a bit more about that, what's prompted you to write that, how's it going, what's going on?
Yeah, so this our English civilization. It's available on Amazon now. And when we look across history, societies and peoples that endure over long periods of time are civilizational peoples. They're the only ones, except for little pockets of, tribal types, etc. And even most of the tribal types that survive do so because they're enmeshed in a larger civilizational structure. And the enemies of humanity, of the species, the resentfuls, as I write about in the Eternal War previous book, more as I've been calling them the financialists in another book I've recently published called The Financialist Kill Chain. Um, these folks know very well that their only counter in the world is healthy civilization, strong, robust, complex, sophisticated civilizations that go back quite some time. Why? Because civilizations are uh, population scale immune systems. They are an immune system, the neurological, neuroemotive, neurocognitive immune system for all of this Marxist, fascist, whatever, resentful's lies are, the estrogen's lies. And so, there's been a massive concerted effort over the last 3 centuries to eradicate English civilization and to replace it with this Western civilization. And increasingly over the last 100 plus years, and Will talks to this, great, particularly when you're talking about Rhodesia, et cetera. Um, they've been so the first Trojan horse was this Western civilization, which came over in the 1688 Inglorious Revolution, and then over the which is eradicating the English civilization and replacing it with this concept and idea of British, which is a completely made up framework. It's a psy-op to deny us who and what we are. And then increasingly over the last century plus, they've been infusing all of that with communism, straight up Marxist communism, and going all in on the eradication of our recognition and understanding that we are a civilizational people that are distinct from Europe, that we are distinct from Western civilization, and that our peoples, even after 1066, when William came across, because people seem to forget William was a Norman, a Norse Norman, not a French Norman. And so he turns out William the Conqueror and most of, not all of his lords were Norsemen. And they had far more in common with the English civilization than they ever did with the French, right? And the only reason they were Normans at all is because the French were like, we can't keep fighting you. So we're going to put you out there as a shield to go fight your own, right? So I thought it increasingly over the last several years that the only way we as a people, why did Rhodesia fall? Why is South Africa close to falling? Because the ability to tap into that linguistic, cultural, societal, mimetic, civilizational immune system was removed from them intentionally. And if we're going to survive what's happening to us now, where they're quite literally physically seeking to replace us, not just conceptually or ideas anymore. It's not enough to psy-op away our culture and civilization. Now they have to eradicate any of the physical genetic members of it. The only way we're going to survive is if we remember collectively that the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, the English, those are more Britannic, right? There's no ethnic English, but the English, the Scots, the Welsh, and the Irish, and wherever we are in the world, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Rhodesia, South Africa, America, etc., we are members of a 1,000+ year old civilization that is extremely robust, extremely rich, with an immense history. And we need to wake up to that and all come together. Otherwise, this divide and conquer, like this whole thing right now where they're trying to, and I know some of the people behind it and I respect them, but they don't know what they're doing ultimately, right? Like this whole let's dissolve the Acts of Union. No, if you divide the British Isles into Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, you will be conquered 5 times faster, right? So this is what was the impetus behind the book. It's a lot of my own thinking. It's a collection of essays, a couple of poems, and this very much goes to the conversations Will and I have been having, several times now that you and I have had, et cetera. So that was the impetus. That's what it is. It's a collection of essays that articulates who and what we are, where we came from, how we got here, how we got corrupted, and what we need to do now to reclaim our English civilization. So I think that's a good place for me to stop.
One thing to pick up on that, I was recently reading Thomas Carlyle's History of Frederick the Great, in the
Mm.
end of volume one, which is quite good. It's very long, but volume one, towards the end of it, he makes the point that if you're looking at English civilization and what it's accomplished, a lot of the accomplishments came after William, as you mentioned, arrived. He makes the point that much like the Prussian kings, though in a more effective fashion, the Normans molded the Anglo-Saxon spirit into something that could conquer and could do these great things and achieve more than just sit around and drinking beer,
And could
as fun as that
survive.
is.
Yeah, not
Yes,
just conquer,
exactly.
but could survive. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And survive is this intact whole.
Yes.
Like they could go to
Yes.
India and come back as nabobs, but they didn't. They didn't go native, perhaps with the
Yes.
exception of Chinese Gordon. They were a very different thing in that regard. And I think it's important to look at what political changes have occurred in the past, say, century and a half. Really, like starting with the Great Reform Act of 1832, but much more importantly in the 1870s and on with the agricultural depression and the more important reform acts. In the attacks haven't been, at least until very, very recently, on like the low level English people, the people who make up the line infantry regiments. For a long time, it wasn't on them specifically. A lot of it was cloaked in helping them, though it didn't. It was on that old Anglo-Norman aristocracy. They really hated the idea that people like the Grosvenors or the Percys or the fifth, name a couple that immediately come to mind, Manners, it could set up shop in 1066 to 1080 and survive and be powerful for so long and direct the country according to what Carlyle recognized in them, this ability to add sternness that then leads to great accomplishment. And I think that's really important because a lot of the things I point out and that EM was pointing out, it's this replacing of a rooted aristocratic spirit of like excellence that I think was really best exemplified by Rhodesia of just, human excellence with this financialist, bohemian, cosmopolitan spirit that the Dutch brought over, the Jews brought over after Cromwell let them back in. It's a very different thing than what the Normans and the Anglo-Norman aristocracy represented. And pretty much all of the attacks have been on it, which is why you have these country houses with the roofs falling in. But the Rothschilds, like bond holdings, never really seem to be impacted in the same way. Or the, great industrialist fortunes never seemed to be impacted in the same way. I think it was a very intentional attack on
Yes.
the spine of the nation.
The defense system. It's okay. So give me a second. I think one of the greatest destructions of some of the greatest treasures of the English speaking peoples was the destruction of all the stately homes after
Hmm.
World War One, and then really after World War Two,
Hmm.
and all done on purpose using the tax base and the tax code. The
Hmm.
government didn't make any money off the tax because why? There wasn't any to take, and that's not what it was about. What it was about is forcing these families to destroy this visual, physical legacy that the people could see down the street and remember their history from the relationship with that family from 300 years ago that's still extant today. So, to that, and this is where, I'm trying every day to try and figure out, how do you undo a 400-year psyop? So I use, just, these are not real numbers, not the exact numbers, because who knows what they are. But let's say that in 1688, which all was set up in the 1620s and 30s, going after King Charles I and the loyal nobles, et cetera, because he had to get rid of them, to what Will's articulating. The flower, the remaining flower, the Norman and Anglo Saxon and other, and Welsh and Scottish, et cetera, aristocracies. Give me a second. I lost my train of thought there. No, the psyop. So, the psyop starts in the 1620s, 1630s. It ultimately leads to the beheading of a king. It leads to Cromwell's rise. Who funded all of that? I mean, really, who funded the Roundheads? Amsterdam, Venice, right? Who sent the Puritans back to the British Isles? And who funded that? And who put them in, who made sure that there was the wealth and the assets? It was all a psyop. It's all similar to what's happening now. Now it's just Muslims, right? How do you, and then they put two puppet kings, Charles II and James II, on the throne. And then ultimately they set up and these people think in 80-year, 100-year cycles, and they set up the replacement with their puppet king, William of Orange, right? So that's a psyop that's been going since the 1620s, 1630s. It's 400 years on now. And how the hell do you undo something like that? And this is the investment they've put into it. If you know, and I'm just using these as example numbers, right? But if you know that you're going to go do a hostile takeover, and you're going to make $1 trillion, there's $1 trillion of wealth to be made on it every year. You'd spend 50%, 80%, 90% on the psyop to keep that going. Right? You'd own education. You'd come to own the church. You'd come to own all the narrative and dialogue and twist and contort all of the reality such that the people and elites, the ones that, because it's way cheaper to psyop people than it is to compromise or buy them off. And it's way more reliable. So the point is, how the hell do we undo this 400-year psyop? And at the heart of it, something, Will, you touched on, is, and this goes back even before this was on the continent, before the 1600s, right? This led to Westphalia, and they set the conditions for that starting in the 12th century, right? It's the whole down with princes. We don't need princes. Okay. How's that been going? Right? Like here in America, we don't need a king. We don't need a prince. Well, until Trump got in office, because other oligarchs, princes, put him in power and did all the behind the scenes stuff to made sure that the steal didn't happen and all that other, and the violence didn't kick off and all that other stuff. Immense effort was put in for a couple of years to make sure that he had a chance to get back in. Now he's in. That wasn't the people that did that. That was oligarchs. That was princes. And they put him in a position of a king. Right? On our own, the people, there's a reason that aristocracies always emerge as the counter to oligarchy. There's a reason that a king or an emperor is always elevated from the princes to a position of arbitrage and ultimate power between them, but they themselves don't have the wealth or power to actually go, against the princes. It's a balance. There's a reason why that happens again and again, always in history. It's why these self-rule systems never make it beyond 200-300 years. Rarely do they even make it beyond 80, 70, 80 years, right? One long saeculum. Okay, so down with princes. We don't need no princes. How's that been going? And oh, by the way, what are you doing right now to turn everything around? So meanwhile, princes elevated a king, even if temporarily, right? To go after the oligarchs and all their power and all this psyop and everything. And the people are running around still at the same time going, well, we don't need no king. We don't need no prince. It's like, who the hell do you think's doing, turning this around for you? Who the hell do you think it's the common man, Joe Snuffy off the street, or even 1,000 or 1,000,000 Joe Snuffies? Now they're important, right? Because the princes need to know that the people got their back, and that king, long-term or temporary, need to know that the people have their back. That's the problem we're having in the United Kingdom right now. It's the things I've been writing about. March on the crown. Stop doing all this crap and stupid stuff in the streets. March on the crown. Occupy Buckingham. Force the crown to their hereditary duties and prerogatives, constitutional prerogatives and historical prerogatives. Do that. And you might be surprised that king and his sons might go to war on your behalf once they know that they're not going to get a knife in the back from their own security. And if they do, the people are going to burn everything down. Right? But this psy-op, down with kings, down with princes, right?
Well, on that point, I think it's important to note that a lot of the policies they've used to destroy that class, the princes, the aristocrats, it has intentionally severed that connection is
Yes.
like the main
Oh, yes.
objective of it. Even in like normie tier books like Class by Paul Fussell, he makes this point that back in the day when society, even in America, was relatively gentry led, you had these great houses, the manor homes, the somewhat smaller here than there, where
Yeah.
men of note led from. They were the centers of political campaigns, of organization and gathering, of connection with the tenants and
Yeah.
local
Yeah.
yeomen. They
Law.
existed and they
Yeah.
were public and they were prominent and preeminent. With the tax policies of roughly 1930 to 1980 or so, that was completely wiped out because the wealthy recognized that if they were in a position of public preeminence or their wealth was shown, like and I'm not a huge fan of the Vanderbilts, but as the Vanderbilts had shown it, say in New York City, it would be taxed because the politics of envy required that the government destroy that via taxation. Whereas if they remained hidden back behind gates, behind walls, in the woods, like even the good
Meek.
families are now, like the heir to the Mellon fortune and dynasty. I forget his first name, but he was one of Trump's primary backers and is very wealthy still, and on the correct side of most issues. But even he, who would be well liked if he were in public, has just remained hidden on their estate, which is set deep in a relatively large section of Virginia, where there's no longer any political objective attached to that estate or the houses on it. It's just severed from the people. So he can try and organize things. He could get Trump into power as he helped doing, but there's not that connection of duty and responsibility and mutual loyalty there that existed into, say, even with the fight of the Parliament bill, where Bender and Willoughby de Broke were considering calling up the county militias they controlled to march on Parliament, and probably could have done so had they wanted, but they didn't. But that still existed then, whereas there's nowhere that exists now because that connection has been severed.
This is the psyop, right? This is exactly the psyop, right? So the financialists machinate with parliamentarians, and parliamentarians is a broader term for, unaccountable bureaucratic governments, the deep state. That's, what we call them now.
Mhm.
And what do? They foster endless wars, destructive wars, which are never possible of being won because they're never funded enough or logistically supported enough to do so. And it destroys and discredits the prince, the king, the prince, the oligarch, the healthy oligarchs. I don't, you know, the ancient Greeks talked about how bad oligarchy is, and they were right because that's the financialists. But and then what do? Well, then you do this campaign where, you get more and more of the former rules and responsibilities of the aristocrat into the hands of the bureaucracy, this unaccountable bureaucracy that's owned and controlled by whoever pays its payroll, promotions, and pensions. And that's rarely actually ever the people, right? So, we look at the 80 years, 100 years, and 30 years wars. What were they? They were specific. They were like long-running World War Ones. They were specifically designed to destroy the legitimacy and the financial wherewithal and break the relationship of the princes and the people of the aristocracy of Europe. And then they had to go across the channel there and do that in the what would become the United Kingdom, and then Ireland, right? And now the rest of the world, they've pretty much done since World War II. At the heart of it is exactly what you're saying, Will, and I think you and I touched on this before, is that severing of the relationship between, you know, well, people, prince, and land, right?
Mhm.
All of which are one. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie Excalibur,
Years
King
ago.
Arthur movie. Oh, you guys must, you must. It's 80s movie. It's brilliant. It's wonderful. I think personally it's the best Arthurian telling ever in a movie. Um, but there's a basically a line in there where the king and the land are one. And if the king doesn't remember that, then the people suffer. Well, that's a fact, and that goes back. I mean, look at all the writings, all the way back to Samaria, et cetera. The king and the Egyptians, et cetera. The king and the land are one, and if the king is loyal to the land thrives, and the people thrive. But the people have an obligation too. It's to both the land and the king. It's a
And
symbiotic relationship. What's that?
sorry to interrupt, but I was just to
Yeah.
say, I think it's important to note that that applies even to industrial undertakings. One I always go back to is the Fitzwilliam family's running of its coal mines in the north
Mm,
of England, where they were aristocrats. Instead of just
yeah.
renting out the coal mines to some like very extractive Scotch oligarch who was going to, run them like a slave shop, they were very intentional about building these mines that produced a profit, but also provided good wages to the people living there, were extremely safe compared to any other mines in the world at the time. Always looking towards the innovations, the updates, the things that would keep the miners safer and make them more productive, building schools for their kids. The whole landed estate thing applied to that industrial undertaking,
Yes.
and it made them
Henry
beloved.
Ford. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
Henry
Henry
Yeah,
Ford.
Ford's
yeah.
another great example. And
Yeah.
then, so when you get Attlee's government nationalizing the mines, the only area where there was any resistance to that at all was located on Wentworth Woodhouse, with the miners fighting the Attlee government because they loved the Fitzwilliams. It was that connection remained intact through the land, but also through the industrial undertaking because both sides put in the work and it recognized their duty to each other based on what was happening. So I think I always focus on the aristocracy and the connection to the land, but I think it's important to note that, as you said, with Ford, with the Fitzwilliams, with these people, it can apply to the modern economy, and it should apply to the modern economy, and that's part of breaking free of the financialist kill chain. I mean, Henry Ford famously
It's
didn't want
the
his company
way,
to be public. It's the only way to do it.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So I've had a whole number of conversations over the last couple of years in these podcast stuff I never expected to have in my life because I've never sought it out. Somebody invited me one day and it's like, okay, I had some time and I was sober. I don't drink that much, honestly, but um, uh, actually where I started, Will, 25 years ago, back in Silicon Valley, almost 26 years ago now, was I meditated for 10 months on where, because I was in tech. We'd just taken a company public in 96. I was building out telecom infrastructure. All this stuff was coming. All of it was happening. And I was listening to the conversations at the cocktail parties and the investment parties on, Sand Hill Road, and et cetera. It was all changing. The dialogue, the conversation was changing. The investors were different. They were coming in from the East Coast and from overseas with other pools of capital, and they had very different ideas than the original venture capitalists, and private equity started. So, anyways, I meditated on for about 10 months because I realized something was wrong, and we were heading to a return on capital economy. And in a return on capital economy, the only humans that have any value are people that have capital. But what we were doing, this was during the dot com, right? The end of the dot com era, is we were steadily moving to a smaller and smaller class of people with capital assets and a larger and larger class of people with no capital assets, just debt, right? And no way, no bridge between the two. And I realized, okay, historically, when populations, civilizations, states, kingdoms, principalities, whatever, get into this state, this condition, they start a war and they genocide their own people in an unwinnable war to maintain it. And I was like, well, let's not do that. Can we use Or we're going to create a massive welfare state that, for all intents and purposes, fully enslaved the vast majority, 60 to 80% of the populace, to the government. That's quite literal slaves, dependent slaves. That's what universal basic income is. You are a slave to the government. Vote this way, do these things, support us and our payroll, promotions and pensions, and we'll let you live. We'll keep giving you, basic bennies. So I actually 20 back in 2020 or 2000, I meditated for 10 months into 2001 on how the hell do we bring a couple billion people, not through wealth transfer, because that doesn't work, but through knowledge transfer of using this angel and seed investing stuff we're doing so well here, take it out of not just tech, but now go into, and Will, you and I think, and you and I have talked as well about this. How do we take this early stage startup concepts and ideas and bring that to the masses, the good, capable masses, such that we're doing this in automotive shops and window shops and HVAC and these other things, and teaching them and helping them understand how to build capital assets for stock companies, capital assets, and how to do finance and banking with capital assets rather than just business entities or personal business, operations. And so that's what got me in investment banking, private equity, all that, all the way up to algorithmic trading and all that other stuff, is trying to understand how does, by an invitation from somebody who invited me across the table, by the way, from technology. And so I thought, okay, we've got 20 or 40 years to work on this problem. Then 9/11 happened. And I realized, no, we got to figure this out. And, I thought we had a couple lifetimes, excuse me. Then I realized, no, we've got somewhere between 20 and 40 years to work this out, or we're all done. And they will genocide all these people. They're going to do the welfare state as much as they can, the nonprofit welfare state, et cetera, as much as they can. But at some point that won't be sustainable. And they'll move to, a massive global cataclysmic war or biological, et cetera. And I said that back in 2000. So that's actually all these other things that I've gotten to over the last 25 years, including service and special forces and all the other kinds of things, and AI studies, et cetera. We're all on this trajectory of how do we bring a couple billion people into the capital asset owning class. And so I worked out, what would a modern manorial system look like? How would a lord use angel and seed investing? How would he use these return on capital models and teach his people, right, how to best capitalize the lands, the resources of the land, the business operations and activities of the land, and run his manor more like a very, a family office is what we call them now, but a far more sophisticated family office than what people are doing. Because historically, that's pretty much what they were. That's why the financials had to undo them, because they were very sophisticated, for all intents and purposes, private equity funds, right? And so that's the first thing I worked on back the first 10 years or so on this trajectory I've been in. And then that's just taken me down these crazy paths. But Will, very much what you're saying, man, there is an opportunity for us to do some pretty extraordinary things without having to do fundamental changes to the whole system regime. It's just, we need to get rid of the financialist, but it doesn't mean that we get rid of all of the financial, all the things that we've learned, the tools that we've learned, the resources that we've learned, the mechanisms and methods and structures. A lot of those are actually really good. It's just, to your point, it's removing the resentful extractionist from that and fragmenting it and decentralizing it to where it's back to the manorial concept and idea, right? It's not a matter now of just who's working your lands and what businesses, but where is the great family's capital at work and in whom? And I tie that now into safety and security, because your investment portfolio, if it's not heavily involved in the physical communities in which you live, you're not safe. You're not physically safe. To say nothing of the Pretorian problem, the fact that your security comes out of one of five entities that are still pretty loyal to the government because most of their pensions come from there, et cetera, right? So I'll stop there.
Well, one more example that's even more recent that I only recently came across when trying to learn more about how the Grosvenors have managed their operations. It's from a book called Aristocrats by Robert Lacey. It's an okay
Hmm.
book, but in one point he's discussing how in the wake of Bender's death, so the second Duke, and all the death duties that followed, and some good people but not great heirs that followed just because of age. It eventually ended up in the hands of Gerald Grosvenor, who at the time he inherited was very young. But he was extremely intentional, as was Bender, about what they put the money into, particularly the money that remained in England. In one
Yeah.
example Lacey gives is that instead of sticking to the old, just rent out the farmland approach or run the lead mine in Chester approach, they
Rent
instead,
seeking. Yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
they instead, I forget the name of the town. I wish I could remember it, but they bought this entire town essentially in Scotland, and they bought the fisheries, they bought the fish canning facilities, they bought the port, and they poured millions of dollars into that for decades. But eventually, because they were willing to do that, it turned into this hugely just successful business adventure, essentially. I think they eventually had to sell it for tax reasons, of course. But before that happened, they built this thing where this port that had been nearly non-existent for decades, they rehabilitated, they dredged the whole port system so it could handle newer modern ships. They rebuilt the infrastructure, they rebuilt the factories. And because of that, the people in that town were intensely loyal to them because otherwise they would have had to rely on, whatever welfare programs were
Yeah,
available
yeah,
at
yeah.
the time or just, low-level work of the worst sort at McDonald's or whatever. But instead they had meaningful jobs like their ancestors had related to the fisheries, related to the port. And it was really a successful thing. And as Gerald, the I think sixth Duke, was running that, he was also deeply involved in the territorial army, deeply involved in his role as an officer in that, and as a local man of prominence related to that. Where I don't know if the current Duke is at all like that. I get the sense that he's not, but unfortunately, but his dad was and did these things that it really worked well if you're looking for a model of reestablishing this. Because I think it's important to note that these examples, they're easier to tell in the past because you can look at 100 years and see what they achieved over those 100 years instead of just, hoping that
Yeah,
Mark
yeah, yeah.
Zuckerberg's going to get better. But it's these things apply in real life and in modern life, and it can be redone. And the benefits that accrue are still relevant and still there in the way that they were in history. You just have to be very intentional about how you do it, which I think is the important thing for people to learn. Like
Yeah,
owning
so
Exxon stock isn't going to have the same benefits for you.
yeah,
So
no, no, no. So brilliant example. Thank you. And you always have real world examples. I really appreciate that. One of the things that maybe might have been done differently, and it wasn't in the consciousness at the time of the fifth Duke or sixth Duke, um, His Grace, is that had they done a better job of for stock companies and capital assets where the community members had ownership, it would have, one, dramatically lowered the single point tax burden on the family, on the Grosvenors themselves, and two, would have made it, there would have been some a broader tax base. So here's the problem. We have a parasite called government. It's almost impossible to get rid of them. The point is you have to regulate them and you have to limit them and you have to restrict them and you have to do all these things. But you can't, as I write about in the book, The Eternal War, you just can't get rid of them. They're eternal. Um, but, and so, you feed the parasites a little bit. But had there been a broader ownership of things, they would have had to fight that whole community. They would have had to go to, legally,
mhm.
structurally, et cetera, go to battle with that whole community rather than having, again, a single point of attack that they could go after, which was, the great family's wealth. So this is part of why I articulate, why I 20 some odd years now, 25 years, I've been looking at all this very closely, is you have to do a broader, and if you want to conceptualize that from the past, well, what were the knights? The knights were, depending on their level of capacities, they were stakeholders, shareholders in the great lord's estate. And those shareholders, not stakeholders, but those shareholders had stakeholders and other shareholders under them, and they managed all, the
Mhm.
subsidiary stuff, right? It's all the same models. Now, the requirement for that, the quid pro quo, was that if the Great Lord was under attack or any one of them were under attack, they would all come together, right? But it made it very, very hard. I mean, of course, all the machinations and games and conflicts and all of those things happen, right? Which is part of what
Hmm.
the joust was about, actually. Part of the reason for the joust was so that competing knights could get their grievances out on the jousting field and not have to go to physical war with one another. People don't talk about that. But point being is this, those knights were somewhat like subsidiary CEOs of the family's portfolio,
Hmm.
investments of, the holding company, shall we say. And so it made it much harder for government, parasitic government, locally and or extraneous, um, to move against that overall estate or any part of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And you can see the differences like Roberts in Mexico, which from what I remember, my brief understanding of, like late 19th, early 20th century Mexican history, you didn't really have that. You had these huge haciendas that operated somewhat
Mhm.
like the Roman latifundia states.
Yes, yes,
That just
Yeah.
breeds resentment. People hate that for
yes. No
obvious reasons.
loyalties.
Yes.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and so instead you get the whole Mexican thing where they liquidate the church, they liquidate the haciendas, they just get constant chaos and socialist revolution, um, which is, from what I understand, why the Bolsheviks fled there, like Trotsky in the
Mm,
20s. It's
oh, interesting.
you have to do these things to stave that off. You don't just accrue the benefits by existing. I think the intentionality part of it and thinking about the structure of it is very important because it doesn't exist organically. You have to do it, which to go back to the Carlyle thing, that's what the Anglo-Norman aristocracy achieved that the others didn't. Like
Yes,
David
yes.
Spring.
Cohesion. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Like there's a book called like European landed elites in the 19th century by David Spring. And he
Mm,
compares the different great powers and their aristocracies and makes the point that despite being somewhat extractive at the financial level from their tenants, the only aristocracy that succeeded at all in maintaining its staying power and its wealth was the Anglo-Norman aristocracy because it focused on this long-term attachment to the
yes,
land and the people on it
yes,
in a way that none of the others
yes.
did. Perhaps with the exception of some of the Prussian Junkers, but they operated a little bit differently. But sorry, you were going to say.
No, 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 no. I'm terribly sorry. I'm completely with you. What the Starting with Egbert, the grandfather, but really Alfred the Great, William the Confessor,
Mhm.
Athelstan, the first king of England. Um, what those three laid down, really the five. Alfred's grandfather was not, I don't know if he was healthy or not, but, Egbert's son,
Mhm.
Alfred the Great's father, I don't remember a whole lot about him. But point being is that what was laid down in the 800s into the early mid 900s was the cultural, legal, linguistic structures, cohesions, systems, institutions, et cetera, that could go on to become a civilization. They didn't until William comes along,
Mhm.
right? And
Spot on.
William comes along with as much as, you know, while they were Norse Normans, they did also pick up some of the better structural things. And what they picked up primarily from the French was that if you're going to be a powerful people, you need to be a civilizational people, which the
Mhm.
French were already on the way of being. Now that's a much smaller civilization, et cetera. But um, it wasn't until the Normans, which are my ancestors on both mother's and father's side, so mixed with the locals, of course, but it wasn't until the Anglo-Norman and people like that get angry and oh, they wiped out all the Normans. I'm a Burlingame, right? Through adoption. That's an old Saxon family. We're still around,
Mhm.
still in the same part of the country. We're not the only one, right? There's a whole number of others. Um, and a good number of them here in America too, by the way, right? And elsewhere in the former empire. But point being is this: when the Normans came along, they took this civilizational seed, this kernel, this capacity for a peoples that were coming together, and if they were could be taken through a crucible, could develop into an actual civilization. And it was the Anglo-Norman Union, the ones that survived that, the ones that fought it out, the ones that found a new balance that created the English civil that I don't want to say created. That's not true. That happened hundreds of years before. But they are the ones that ensured that, like the white tree of Icthillion in Lord of the Rings, right? That this mighty oak developed into a civilization, this
Hmm.
acorn and small sapling developed into a mighty oak that is the English civilization. And at the core and heart of that was this very sophisticated distribution of power and the balance of power from the smallest level, the shire level, all the way up. And
Hmm.
at the heart of that were these manorial estates, which for their time were, again, for all intents and purposes, holding companies. We can think of them now, the term is family offices. And, I know you, Robert, you work with finance a lot, and Will, you do as well, particularly on the foundation side of things. But, family offices are the new manorial estates. And they're doing a lot of the right things, but they're not in some ways. And they're not because one, and I know people that are heavily involved in the family offices and giving them guidance, but they're not thinking in this old concept and idea of place.
Hmm.
They're thinking in terms of this decoupled financial realm and not place and people in that place. And how are you how are you and your assets truly safe and secure? It's multi-generational, multi-family, mutually beneficial business relationships. And what does that mean? Commingling of assets,
Hmm.
right? Now they're being sold by the financialist, all this tokenization, all this virtualization, all of this kind of stuff. Your wealth is going to be secure. It's going to be in these contracts. Great. Who's going to enforce that?
Yeah.
Right?
There's there's the good tweet where it's like if you're in a room with three people and one of them has $1 million in Bitcoin on a flash drive, another has $1 million in gold in a suitcase, and the third has a $600 Glock, who's the most powerful man in the room?
I get, because I'm former military, I can buy my Glocks cheaper. Just put that out there. It's just good business, right? Now I got gold, Bitcoin, and $1 million portfolio. Yeah. No, Clay Martin, my friend Clay Martin said this in a conversation with some wealthy people on a podcast, actually, and you can hear a pin drop like, "Yeah." He's like, all this stuff you guys are doing. He's like, who do you think owns that? You or your head of security,
Hmm.
right?
Point
So,
well made.
yeah, all this virtualization, everything. So, I don't think, here's what my firm belief is, right? My firm belief is we've already returned to aristocracy in the form of family offices. It's already done. Multifamily, multi-generational family offices. It's already done, right? Assets, all of it. Shifting away from foundations and nonprofits because the realization that that didn't work because we put just in the last 25 years, we put several tens of trillions of dollars into it. It hasn't changed a damn thing. In fact, just made it worse,
Hmm.
right? Um, there is an awareness here, and we've all talked this, and I've talked it with Ben Keller a couple of times, you know, an awareness that there's a generational transition going on now, and there's a whole lot of trades, businesses, and going ventures that, private equity swooping in as fast as they can to get into these, HVAC companies and, local builders and other things. Family offices need to be getting in there and making sure that private equity doesn't get it because private equity will just destroy everything. That's
Hmm.
all they care about. They just want to extract. They don't want to build anything. Um, the piece that is missing is this, and I've been trying, I don't know how to, I wrote this book and I've written others and I'm writing another one now and I'm having, but people need to, these high net worth folks need to understand that your fancy security doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whatever organizations they come out of, unless you have capital asset commingling relationships with them and their family. And more importantly, I'll give you another one that just stuns me. The reason that the high net worth, the dukes, the earls, the king, the people with castles, the reason they were secure is because they would pull the soldiers' families into the castle too.
Hmm.
You never
Hmm.
hear that now. So, oh, my security, I pay them 300,000 dollars a year and et cetera, and they're going to protect me. Their family's out over there in that community. I don't know, as a Green Beret, I might not even come after you. I might just go take their family and then say, you're going to kill that guy or your family's dead. Right? So your compound out in Wyoming, your bunker down in, New Zealand, you're probably not even going to make it there. Right? So this whole concept and idea of wealth and what is your wealth? 90% of wealth today is virtualized. It's not even real. It's derivatives. $5 quadrillion in derivatives. Most of that wealth isn't even real. It's so many layers and layers and layers of derivative, vaporware. The only thing that's real when you get right down to it is the land that you can productively use. And the only thing that makes that real is people willing to do violence to hold it for you that will be loyal to you.
Well, and even ignoring the, not that it should be ignored, but even like if you're just talking to normal people and don't want to scare them at the bar, even yeah, the reliability question is a huge one. Like I don't know if you see their account on X, but one of my friends goes by Untapped Growth and Smoke River Ranch on Twitter, and they're trying to
Send me
breed
the
a
links. Yeah,
yeah,
send me the
I'll
links.
send it
Sorry.
to
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
But
Okay.
they're
Yeah.
trying to breed a type of cattle that can survive and without all the modern additives,
Mm,
essentially, doing a good job with it. But
awesome.
one point they've made is that it's impossible to find reliable people to do anything, particularly with a handshake now. You can if you're
Yes.
extremely intentional about with whom you do business and why you're doing it with them, and having or meeting people who have fellow long time horizons regarding it. But they've made the point that, we're trying to find people to do relatively easy work that they should be able to do for relatively high salaries. And we've had 100% failure to keep people on and have them do what they agreed to do. They just can't get it done. And it hurts that they're a startup and trying to find new people rather than having these existing relationships. But it's very difficult to do. And having those relationships where you can find people who will do what you need them to do and be loyal even when you're not watching them like a hawk. That's a big opportunity, I think, for these family offices, for these families with long time horizons. And that, one strength the Grosvenors had, just to go back to them, is they had a couple very loyal and very good estate agents who helped them manage things in a way that they weren't destroyed by death taxes. They didn't get caught doing anything illegal because they didn't do anything illegal. They had people on whom they could rely. That was part of the structure, and it's why they survived when others who weren't like that and didn't have that focus failed. And I just talking to people who are very wealthy and might even have long time horizons, they often fail to note that side of the equation in that they want most relationships to be purely transactional business relationships because they don't want to be taken advantage of or, have someone screw them like Rockefeller was famously screwed when he was trying to do business at his church with people he met there at whatever church he went to in New York. They want to avoid that. So they try and make things transactional. But I think that's a big problem and
Yeah.
it's a big lurking problem for them because they're
Yeah.
not going to have anyone on whom they can rely, even in business
Yes.
negotiations. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big
No,
problem.
I'm totally, completely with you, man. I've been working on this for 20 some odd years. I've even written a couple books about it, right? Starting for leadership and the way of the team. Um, loyalty is never achieved transactionally.
Hmm.
It always has to be relationship. And yes, you're going to get into some difficulties and problems, et cetera. I will say this, there are a lot of good quality people out there. They don't get through the gatekeepers. Virtually every time I run across
Hmm.
and the ones that get through the gatekeepers, they're all transactional based. Why? Because the gatekeepers for virtually every gatekeeper I've ever met for any one of these families, including one of the wealthiest in the world that I've worked close directly with, right? Um, their gatekeepers are all transactional. Their gatekeepers are very good and specialized for the old system that is rapidly falling apart and decaying in front of us and is never coming back, that
Hmm.
transactional based system. And so most of what I'm finding is this gatekeeper problem, and it's historical, by the way. In fact, the gatekeeper problem is why a lot of kingdoms and even states have collapsed. Because, and yes, how do you trust? How do you get through? Well, I'm going to tell you who you should be orienting towards. You should be oriented towards soldiers. They've already demonstrated that they serve, it's particularly the combat arms soldiers
Hmm. Hmm.
specifically. Okay. They've already demonstrated that they have, that their instinct is to serve. They've already demonstrated that they are willing and um, dedicated to go to the full extent of even their own life to serve. They continue to want to serve across their whole life. This is the work I was doing with the Buffett family and population health stuff is, you know, part of traumatic brain injury recovery and related PTSD, if somebody has it, is identity redevelopment. And there's a piece in there, I don't want to go too far, but it's something just for people to parse apart later. But one of the biggest problems we have with the people who like to serve in the hard roles is that in men, the caregiver archetype and the protector archetype can mask as the same thing, and they're not. And so when you're helping somebody do identity redevelopment, you need to work out whether that person's archetype is a caregiver, in which case you need to help them build their identity this way, or whether they're a protector and you need to help them build their identity this way. Caregivers get uh, emotionally, psychologically destroyed by harming people. Protectors on the other side don't. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't impact them, et cetera, but they don't. They build stronger structures and you got to take it. So, anyways, point is, these families need to be focusing on combat armed soldiers, period. And they need to learn, and this is a skill that's been intentionally back to your point about the, this 400-year process in Psy-op to break the people and the princes, to break and really specifically to break the knights, right? The knight-oriented, minded kind of people from the relationship with the prince. How do you do that? You raise stress and conflict with other states and nations to where no prince can afford their security assets anymore, and then you nationalize that in the form of this nation state structure, and you rob the families of the security capabilities and the relationships with the security peoples, the real relationships. And I don't mean a contract with some, executive protection company, um, or some personal detail. And you deny these high net worth families, these, princely families, the relationship with the very people that will do those two things. One, secure them, but two, be the ones who know how to assess and process and filter people, right? And how to identify somebody that's a pretty good person or could be a pretty good person, but they just need a little bit more management, a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more, you know, careful work to get them bought into, hey, this is in your best interest, this is in your family's children's best interest, etc. So,
I think the one word to me that stems from all of this is trust. I mean, yeah, you could shove ethics and
yeah,
values in there as well, actually. And I think that,
yeah,
all three of us are good, honest gentlemen. If we make a mistake, I like to think we'd hold our hands up and do what we need to do to make that right, whatever it might be.
yeah,
And I think all the factors that well, I say we've discussed, you and Will have discussed today, is stems from a breakdown in communication, as Led Zeppelin would say, breakdown communication or communication breakdown, sorry. And then also just trust in general that it, as Will alluded to earlier on, people will start up business. Do send me those links as well. I'll put them on the post, Will, that comes with this. Trust, and we're losing that trust very, very, very quickly. How people still trust the parasite that is government is beyond me. But I think that's the word. If I was honing it into that, it would be that, and it's a
yeah,
lack of it.
yeah. Look at South Africa.
Hmm.
I mean, South Africa is the prime example of a no trust society. This is one of ours, right? This isn't South Africa is an English, that's one of the core English civilizational peoples. And yes, there was a kerfluffle with the Boers and the Boer Wars and all of that, but they're family. It's not like us Americans didn't fight the family at some point, right? But we're still part of the family, right? Families have family feuds, but you're absolutely right. And the problem is that part of this psyop. That is one of the pillars of the psyop. So first you delegitimize princes by tying them up in expensive wars and fights, and then you do the tax stuff, Will, as you know so well.
Hmm.
The and you the people get exhausted and they just can't afford to protect the prince anymore, right? And the prince has to steadily do more and more to enclose the commons of their people just to pay the debts and just to survive themselves. Okay. Then what you do is you raise the cost of national security above the level that any manorial state can provide from intelligence, because those go together, right? Intelligence work and counterintelligence work and security, and you raise those to the point to where even these great houses have to commingle that at the state level. Well, now you've just robbed them of their own intelligence assets, capabilities. They got to go to the state for that, right? And so what are you doing? You're breaking these. Okay, so you're delegitimizing. You're bankrupting. The people are exhausting. You're removing the intelligence and security assets, capabilities, and thinking from the elite families, the princes. But what are you steadily doing in all of that? You're transitioning trust from that prince and their people working together in this, tripartite land prince people, right? And you're transferring that trust to the state. And the state is intentionally feeding distrust between them because heaven forbid that tripartite comes back together in one of these, dukedoms or earldoms or even here in the United States in a state or a county or whatever it is, right? Heaven forbid. As well, they are breaking that trust because they want an overall, the financialists specifically want an overall trustless society because then they can do whatever they want. Things collapse on will, on demand, and they can come in for pennies on the dollar and buy things,
I
right?
think.
These are
Mhm.
parasites. They want to own everything.
Well,
That's
and
all they want.
dude, to your point about severing those connections so they can do this, some of the threads we've touched on, one is the like rampant anti-prince attitude in continental
Yes.
Europe,
Yeah.
where, but then that came to America because the 48ers, the Germans who came here and overwhelmingly fought for Lincoln, they were essentially all socialists who were on board with that, hated the idea of a landed gentry, wanted to destroy it. And so they fought to destroy it. And against whom were they fighting? Wade Hampton is a great example. If you haven't looked up the Hampton Legion, you should. He was a
Mm,
large planner, um, well liked. There's very little bad that's ever said about Wade Hampton. I
mm.
think he was the third, maybe, but regardless, he raised his own legion of however many thousand
Yeah,
men,
yeah,
paid
yeah.
out of
Yeah.
pocket, armed out of pocket, led them into battle, and actually led them quite well despite not having much military experience. And so, that's against whom the 48ers were fighting, where it's this clash of Puritanism in its essence, where it's just trying to break down every form of hierarchy for this financialist type system
Yeah.
against the old attempt to create rootedness in the new world and its outgrowths. But yeah, I think they really want to prevent anything like that from happening again. And you can see it in these little incidents where it's cropped up. For example, why was Eric Prince's Blackwater destroyed? Well, they say it's because of Nassau Square, but really, if you look at what got people mad, it was when Blackwater was called in to defend people in New Orleans during the Katrina riots,
Mm.
where Blackwater had to fight off gangbangers who were shooting at it from overpasses around the city. And the state didn't want that because that is the antidote to anarcho-tyranny. And they were led by a
Correct.
charismatic, bright guy who
Correct.
was able to create these bonds of loyalty.
Who
And so,
also inherited $900 million, so he was a
yes,
prince.
yes, exactly. His name might be a little on the nose.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Here's what happens though, right? Rome became an empire, and Rome found a way to go from this oligarchic tyranny to an aristocracy, an imperial aristocracy, and it worked for a time. Byzantium stepped out of there because there was still a lingering problem in the Roman Empire, and that was the fact that the Praetorians owned it. And how did they
Mhm.
own it? Same way as today. They owned, so people know if they study their history about the Praetorians killing emperors and replacing emperors and what was it, four emperors in 1 year kind of period,
Yeah.
et cetera. What isn't in the history books on purpose is that the Praetorians were also the security for generals, for magistrates, right? For business elites and the nobility. Isn't that kind of like today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right? Isn't that kind of like today? All over the Western world, the English speaking world, the security is state level. Look what happened in 1947 with the instantiation, the merging of the global mafia and the intelligence communities into a single organization, one of which core members was a two-star freaking German general who led the intelligence operations for the Eastern Front, Galen, who then in 1952 was made head of German intelligence, the BDU, right? So we're in this Praetorian problem where it's just like Rome. Right? It's 300 years of Praetorians from behind the scenes owned all of these people, including Marcus Aurelius, the first emperor to finally break free because he killed them, drew them out. He and his ancestors, true predecessors, drew them out over 100 years and defeated them at Milvian Bridge in a big battle and then hunted them. And then portions of them fled to Venice, to the lagoons, and created Venice and here we are, Amsterdam, City of London, etc. Same people, same concept, same idea, same Praetorian system. The only way high net worth people are going to be free is they're going to have to reclaim and reinvest in and conceptualize. This is why I've developed these sophisticated continuity planning guidelines. Again, going back to where this all started for me 25 years ago is what does a modern manor look like? What does a manorial estate look like in taking care of everything it needs to, still being loyal to the super organization, right? If it's a
Hmm.
state or whatever it is, but being, wholly capable and independent in the modern world. Um, One of the things, back to Will, what you were saying before you went to get some water, is that they have to have natural, organic to them, multi-generational relationships with killers,
Hmm.
with the knights, with the fighters. Well, guess what? Killing's only about 1% of a war. Everything else is intelligence, logistics, manpower, training, education, right? It's all these, population dynamics, human terrain dynamics. It's all these other complex, sophisticated dimethyl things. They have to re-embrace this. They have to bring this back in, look to the past and go, okay, well, these are the things we're going to have to do for ourselves. And we're going to have to figure out how to fit that into our cost models and into our risk models and risk profile models and mitigation, all of that. Well, what does that do? Many things, but to your statement, because yes, it is an issue. But part of that, now that USAID is gone and what that really entails, but USAID was
Hmm.
just one piece of a much larger thing. There is still about $100 million or $100 trillion war chest offshore in the spider's web. It's all derivative funds, so I suspect at some point they're going to collapse the economies. They need to, anyways, for a hard reset. And then it's a matter of,
Hmm.
is it an 18-month hard collapse or is it a 36 or 60-month or whatever, right? Um, but they need to wipe out a lot of that derivative paper wealth that's being used to continue to fund a lot of these, quote unquote, social welfare, et cetera, social movements and all this other kind of stuff, the NGOs.
Hmm.
Because what that'll do is that'll wipe out a lot of the reason that people are unreliable is because they can afford to be. Take
Hmm.
away their
It's
ability to
true.
afford it, and they got to start being, and beautiful thing, younger guys like you and really the Zoomer generation, they're already starting to figure this out, right?
Hmm.
Like these kids, a lot of these kids have jobs, they take them serious, right? The Zoomer generation.
Hmm.
But you take away speculation in digital assets, like that's kind of blown itself up with the NFT thing and everything else, and people have seen wealth just destroyed, and they watched the crypto thing destroy wealth, et cetera. This younger generation, so they're going out and getting real jobs. They're looking at real companies, real humble businesses. They're not looking at college. A lot of my daughter's group of friends, there's probably only three of them that are serious about college. The rest are all working on, let's go do, and we're kind of level of family where these kids could all pretty much go to college if they want to, right? And so they're figuring out. So point being is, you need to bring the war fighters back into your house, and you need to form, multi-generational asset commingling relationships with them. And you need that war fighting mind, the full seven elements of power: diplomacy, information, martial, economics, finance, intelligence, and law enforcement. You need that thinking back in your house, native to your house, as one of your core advisors and gatekeepers, because you cannot be a full, a DMEFL, seven elements of power warfighter, and be transactional. It's all relational, right? And it's relationships across time, cross generations, dealing with internal and external forces. You also work with them because it turns out these types of people are the ones who do um, the vetting of people very well. They're always looking for people to bring up and train and prepare. We're very good at training, right? So all these kinds of skill sets that these families need, you can get them in that reintroducing the martial capabilities to your own house, the martial intel, and you cannot do that contracting to some private contracting company. You can't, because they're not loyal to you. You're a client. They can replace you and your family like that. Doesn't matter how much money you have. They don't care. They're told to turn against you, they'll turn against you.
Well, and you mentioned the derivatives collapse. I was talking about this with a friend recently. One interesting thing, if you look at the better members of the American wealth elite before the Great Depression. A lot of them were old families. The New York 400 was somewhat decayed at that point,
Yeah,
but a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
those
yeah.
people had fought in the Revolution, fought in the wars as volunteers, did all the things that they should. Those somewhat deracinated compared to, say, the Anglo-Norman elite, but their money was largely in these financialized, abstracted assets rather than in something more permanent, like a permanently
Yeah,
held business or a
yeah,
privately held business or land. And so when the Depression came and they'd been trading on margin, they got
yeah,
liquidated and they
yeah.
don't exist anymore and they lost their influence completely. You can even see this in the ones that kind of survived, like the House of Morgan, where JP Morgan, people dislike him, but I think he was broadly
He
he
was
had
American
positive
first.
qualities. Yeah, he
Yeah,
was
he was
American
American
first.
first. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And
He's about
he
all I'll give him.
and is related to the American First thing. He did try and keep subversive elements out of Wall
Yes,
Street and was
yes,
largely able to achieve
yes,
that because of his pre or his
yes.
power and influence. It is his big positive quality in my book.
He
His
also
son,
had power and influence against the British, this
yes,
British system
yes,
that kept trying to infiltrate. And he would go to London and he would tell them, "We're not doing this," right?
yes,
Yeah. So,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Jack, however, was a little a little bit dissipated compared to his father in that he didn't really focus on the business. He just spent time on the yacht or shooting. Like
Yeah,
he
yeah,
didn't
yeah, yeah.
focus on it. And when he lost a lot of his money, he also lost a lot of his power. Wall Street after the Depression, really, I think because of Jack's just abdication of duty, was a much worse place and has become the parasitic element it is in large part because of that, which is a huge problem. So the financialization thing isn't just, oh, you're going to lose your money. It's also that very bad consequences can stem from that, even if you kind of survive it, because it just doesn't work. When you lose it all, you do, in fact, lose it all as they did. And there are these cases of it happening that are hugely problematic at this point. I mean, the Morgans didn't
So,
even keep the Morgan family business within 2 generations. Gone.
well, look at, I'm from San Francisco and a bit of a wine drinker sometimes, but which I didn't actually start drinking until I was in my late 40s. Couldn't stand wine. But look at Robert Mondavi up in Napa Sonoma. He can't even use his own name anymore, right? Because the financialists came in and did all this stuff and put a couple billion in, and then they intentionally did it in such a way, and it grew extensively. And he bought all these vineyards and did all these labels and brands and everything, and then they collapsed him, and now he can't even use his own name, right? And so, that's that step 7 of the financialist kill chain where they collapse it so they can come in and take everything that you built for pennies on the dollar and you're out. Well, what is
Hmm.
that? That's another way to defang and ensure you don't get the emergence of princes,
Hmm.
right? So, the depression was done on purpose. That was straight up done
Absolutely.
on purpose, right? And what was it done on purpose for? It was done on purpose specifically to break the British and the Americans, right?
When you can
Why?
track that in the encouraging people to trade on margin and then yanking that away
Hmm.
with a slight change from the Federal Reserve, it was,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but it was just
No, 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 no. Yeah.
obviously intentional.
Obviously, right? And that's what it was. It's like, okay, well, there's still an aristocratic system in the world. It's in America and the United Kingdom.
Hmm.
We have to break that, right? And
That's
here's what's happening. It's emerging again,
hmm
right?
Hmm.
Because again, back to the book, the English, this our English civilization. We are, as Englishmen, right, as ancestors of this or descendants of this English civilization, we are instinctually an aristocratic people.
Hmm.
Instinctually, it's in every bit of our language, it's in our laws, our constitution, it's in everything. We are a aristocratic people. Well, guess what? That's what actually has been our strength. And this total enslavement to continental Europe and the banks of continental Europe, et cetera, has all happened when we forgot that. Now here's the extraordinary thing about the English civilization as opposed to any of the other imperial, monarchical, aristocratic systems that we know of, right? Ours started with a balance was instantiated by a king who hung judges, right? It was instantiated as a balance of power between people, prince, and what we would call king, right? But parliament is really government, right? The king is government writ large, right? From our very beginning with the common law, which he ensured was translated into English, and all the great works were translated in English. The judges had to do, the judges and the barristers had to conduct everything in English, and the ones that didn't, because they were abusing power, he hung them, over 40 judges, right? I think we should be putting judges on pikes right now, but um, quite literally, especially the foreign-born ones. It's like, where in the hell did, anyways, um, point being is this. Yes, we're an aristocratic system. We're an aristocratic people in our bones. However, the aristocracy for us every 400 years has fought out this balance of power. And every time, excepting in the 1600s, every time we've restored the balance between the people, the princes, and the king. Whatever those forms, structural forms take,
Mhm.
right? But it's really the people, the wealthy elite, and the governance structure. That's the way we can look at it. Well, we're 400 years on. We can't lose it this time. Well,
Mhm.
you don't look forward to some magic bloody system that we're going to somehow miraculously go to, because I hate to tell you people, every one of our ancestors tried that for thousands of years. Everything that's possible has been tried, and the only thing that works is this aristocratic system that is a balance of forces, a balance of power. And so we have gotten, for these high net worth families, the new aristocratic class, you need to go back there. You need to look to the past. You need to modernize that. You need to, you know,
Mhm.
I am not actually opposed to the fact that the aristocracy and the monarchy was broken. And we've had puppet kings for 300 some odd years. So people think the crown has had any power is stupid, because that army that was sent over William of Orange, and it's been maintained ever since, was not there to conquer the English people. It was there to keep the crown and let the king know, you ever try to build an army, you ever try to work against us, we'll kill you, right? You and your kids and your family and everybody else. And so the crown of England has been owned and controlled by the Pretorians since 1688. There's been no king that has had any power since Charles the First, right? So we've got to look to the past for these sophisticated, complex organizational structures, because they held for 1,000 years, right? And even now, even though we've been occupied and we've been under this 400-year Psy-op, it's still held, right? And you want another example that's not us, not the English system. The Russians survived communism.
Mhm.
The Chinese survived communism. Neither are communist anymore. Neither ever want to be communist anymore, right? And how did they do it? Specifically, they remembered that they are a civilizational people, and they, at one point, as they got through their collapse, their post, communist collapse, they brought their civilization forward. It's their immune system is the only thing that's going to work. And in our system, our civilization is an aristocratic civilization. There are people, princes, and kings, right? And a king. And great. There's nothing wrong with that. We are artificially create that at every scale every day, anyways. Let's use it, right? And what is it? Okay, it's a balance of power, though. There's no absolute monarch. And that's what Alfred the Great set in motion. Alfred the Great did not want to be an absolute monarch and didn't want the English civilization to have absolute monarchs. And William Marshall and the barons fought that out 400 years later. And the Magna Carta came out,
Mm.
and William Marshall, First Lord Pembroke, made sure that the Magna Carta happened. He threatened John while still being loyal. He threatened John with another baronial war, and he made sure that the Magna Carta held. 400 years on, we got the English Constitution and the English Bill of Rights. All that was good, just hasn't been adhered to because we allowed this parasite, we allowed this psyop parasite to get in there at the same time. But the structures are all solid. That's where the American Constitution and Bill of Rights would come from. So I'm talking too much now.
No, no, don't worry about that at all. So my question on all of that is what happens next? And the reason I say that is because in previous conversations I've had with various people is if we go and look what's happening, or well, look what's happened in the UK for the last 30 years, there is a lot of different people entering the country who have different religious beliefs and so forth. Does that have an imp or will that have an impact moving forwards? Feel free to discuss how you want. I'm just concerned we've just got that element happening at the moment, and that's gonna. Well, we're seeing it already. Flags this, and different people, home secretaries, and this, and so forth. Discuss as you will. That's sort of one thing that I think would concern me, and possibly would concern people listening to this as well.
I think there are two things on that point that I think are important. One is that the present migrant problem is not the like Spanish Reconquista. It's fun like language where we need to, have a reconquest and stop this from happening. But, these are welfare like parasites, not the Moors or the Saracens. I think just sending them back will be possible and not really that big of a challenge
Good luck
if the
with that,
government
man.
problem has been solved. I think the thing that matters more to me is looking at Roman history. If you look at, which Ian brought up earlier, if you look at a big problem for the empire as the Republic ended and the empire began, is that those who had handled like the administration of it, or the Roman version of the gentry and aristocratic classes, the equites and the patricians, respectively.
Yeah.
And they were a different group than the Roman plebeians. Historically, they were primarily Indo-European in origin rather than early European farmer in origin. And they were different. They had different mindsets. They had different um, conceptions of their duties and responsibilities. They then largely died out thanks to the wars, thanks to just demoralization and having a low TFR, where those traditional classes or the families that composed them, these old Indo-European families, really disappeared by the time of the early empire. And at that point, the emperors still needed people in those positions, so they replaced them with varying groups from around the empires, Gauls, Spaniards, Scythians. That didn't work out that well. It wasn't the same thing. Those groups were far more extractive and unwilling to negotiate with the other orders than the traditional patricians and equites had been. And they didn't have the same conception of duty and responsibility in their role within this governing system. And in part, that was because the emperors were a different beast than the Republican Senate had been. But it was also just that they didn't care in the same way. I think that is going to be the big problem with immigration for places like America and Britain. It's not just that the governments have put Scythian archers in charge and those need to be gotten rid of. It's much rather that now the elite class, because of intermarriage, has devolved to the point where it's no longer this Anglo-Norman gentry and aristocracy. It's this bohemian cosmopolitan elite with varying groups from all over the globalist American empire, the gay, that compose it. And they don't have the same sense of things that, say, the Virginia gentry did around the time of the founding. They just don't. But they do have a similar amount of power and wealth that they can use to achieve more power. And so I think that is the big issue that the Great Replacement hasn't just struck countries generally. It has struck the ruling class and embedded itself much more deeply there. And that will have to be gotten rid of. And the process of getting rid of that will be much more painful than just deporting the welfare recipients.
Yeah, so while somewhat in principle and certainly historical context, I can't disagree with you. I will fundamentally disagree in another way. I have fought these people. All right. Um, this is going to be bloody. And the thing that we have to do very much this time, because you can see all the disgust stuff that's being triggered, right? All the
Mhm.
intentional attempt to get people like us into a position of disgust, because when the Anglo-Saxon, when the English-speaking peoples and Germanic peoples get into a place of disgust, we slaughter.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what they want, right? They're flooding our countries with these people, the dregs of their societies, because they want us to kill them. Do you think they're going to just take them back? Do you think we're going to be able to, tens of millions of people, we're going to be able to just send them back? More importantly, they've got leadership, their terrorist leadership, martial leadership all across. And I'll give you another piece to that. It will be the Azovs who lead the fight against us in our own lands. And they've already infiltrated all over where there's Ukrainian refugees.
Mhm.
We have a fight ahead of us. Why? Because the people behind, yes, you're right about the pampered elite. They're going to get destroyed. They're going to get wiped out. Some of them are going to have to fight, but most of them are not going to have to fight. We just destroy their wealth. Why? Because it's all fraction, it's all derivatized,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
riddled throughout there and embedded now in government, right? Even here in America, where they're trying to hunker down and outweight the administration, is individuals who are fully committed to the war. We have not finished the war on terror. We have not. So just like World War One set up World War Two, the GWAT set up the fight that's coming. Now there's a difference here, and I wrote up the piece to this morning. Um, when this fight comes, we need to keep it in our own lands. We need to not allow them to drive us, which is their intent, because their four-fifths population reduction globally is, they mean that. They mean it, and they are all engaged. They are all in. And so we are going to have to fight. And it's a real fight. And if you think that those Azovs don't know what the hell they're doing after fighting a modern war for 3 years and killing 1.8 million of their own men, they don't care, right? The power elite in our own countries don't care. The financialists don't care. To them, that was Russians killing Russians. That wasn't Ukrainians dying. That was Russians dying to them. They hate the Slavs. They're a peasant, low class, low IQ people to them, right? So killing's coming. It's going to be ugly. We need to make sure that they don't allow, that we don't let them do to us, the English speaking peoples, primarily, as they did to the Germans in World War II, that led to the death of 5 million Germans, men,
Mhm.
maybe seven, and tens of millions of other peoples. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen, but don't think for a second we don't have a bloody fight in our own countries and our own lands. They're already here. They're already prepared. They've been funding for decades. They've been, organizing structure, doing their intel for decades. As soon as that Russia-Ukraine war, the Russian Civil War is done,
Mm.
it's coming because the financialists, one, you got two groups working together, hand in hand. You got the Malthusians who are all in on 4/5 population reduction. They're not even hiding it. They're totally open about it. They're actively working towards it. You've got to look at the things that are coming out about the vaccines, et cetera. Those were
Mhm.
bioweapons.
Mhm.
The other piece is you've got the financialists who their 400-year system is completely and utterly bankrupt. They can't steal any more assets from the rest of the world because Russia, China, the BRICS have said no. And the BRICS have just proven in a massive 3-year war that they can actually mean no, right? And so the financialists have to collapse Europe, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United Kingdom, Ireland. They have to collapse it and take it for pennies on the dollar. And the only thing that does that is a massive conflagration at home. They don't care. They don't care for the reason you said. So I'm not worried about the effete estrogens, et cetera. I am about some of them because some of them are malevolent people, like this new Home Secretary in the United Kingdom. That
Hmm.
person's now the head of MI5,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
right? And this other Yvette Cooper or whatever, communist, is the head of MI6. Not directly, not quite like the Home Secretary is directly the head of MI5, but okay. So your generation is going to have to fight. My generation is going to have to lead. There's no way around that. However, there is one not proviso. There is one very positive thing in all these conversations, discussions, and everything that's happened is that your generation in these conversations, and particularly you, Will, right, and others, are
Hmm.
having conversations about what structurally needs to be on the other side, right? And that's extraordinary because we need to make sure that because what's going to happen is we're going to reset the English civilization again. We're going to reconstitutionalize. We'll plug holes in, our common law. We're
Hmm.
going to plug holes in our constitutional structures and systems. It's what we do, right? What we need to make sure of is, unlike the last cycle in the 1600s, we don't allow the financialist in here to, parasitically embed themselves to corrupt this, you know, to corrupt the English civilization for the next 400 years till we get to this place again, right? And so it's your generation who's doing all of this extraordinary work and the conversations you're having. You're thinking through things that my generation sure as hell didn't when we were your guys' age, right? And so for me, I don't mind. I'm an Xer, an older Xer. I got some fight still in me. I know how to fight these people. I got no problem doing it, right? Let us carry that weight. I mean, we're all going to have to fight together, but let us, the Xers and the older millennials that have been in these fights, we'll carry the burden of that, right? But you guys need to keep talking and thinking and working out and building relationships like this, right, between you guys and others, because we do need to make sure, just like the founding fathers of America did, just like Athelstan, William, and his father Alfred did in their time. We need to work out all this complex, restoration of the English civilization through the restoration of common law, restoration of constitutionality, restoration of Bill of Rights for all of us now, right? All of us English-speaking peoples, et cetera. You got to work all that out in the modern context with all the technologies we have and all of the, science and et cetera, et cetera. But don't make any mistake that blood isn't coming. It is, and it's coming in our own lands in our own time. There's no way around it. Now, what we have to do is make sure it doesn't go too far. We must, because we'll destroy ourselves in that, which is also something they want.
Well, guys, I have
Yeah.
another show coming up where I'll probably
Yeah,
need to hop off. But
yeah,
No, so I
yeah,
was about to say the same thing while I was looking at the eye on the clock. Let's very quickly wrap up if we can. If both of you guys start with you, Will, then feel free to head to your other show. I will put all these links in the show notes, but just do tell people how they can find you, get in touch with you, please. Will first, so you can go to your other show.
yeah.
Yeah, easiest place to find me is on X. If you look up Will Tanner, I should pop up. But if not, my username's at Will_Tanner_1. I do most of my writing on the American Tribune.news, mainly about Rhodesia, colonial history, and what we've talked about here. And then if you like hearing me talk, I do a podcast called The Old World that you should be able to find on most podcast platforms. I also post it on the Substack. And those are the probably easiest places to find me. But thanks for having me on, Robert. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, I'd love to stay, but I just need to hop off to get ready
Yeah.
for the next show in a couple minutes. But good talking to y'all guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Likewise. Cheers, Will. Take care now. Bye bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
AM, it's just the two of us now. So
Yeah. I got
obviously,
to jump off
love
soon too.
speaking
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
Will. I will ask you, as it's just us two, before how people can find you, etc. Is there anything else that we haven't spoken about today that you would like to bring to people's attention before we sign off?
Not really. I think maybe just we are, people need to accept that we are a civilizational people and our civilization is extraordinary. And when just before the shooting starts, just before the atrocities start, and let's make no bones about it, the attempt to demoralize, the attempt to confuse, the attempt to sow discord in a cohesive people or in a people that could come together cohesively is just, everything that can be done, gaslighting, projection, transference, all of that, everything that can be done to keep a people from actually coming together to defend themselves is done. And we have got to realize and accept that we need, while it's important that we're English or we're Irish or we're Scottish or we're, Welsh or we're Canadian or we're American. Well, forget the Canadians; they're kind of weird, anyways. But Western Canada. Um, Point being is that if we continue to think in those terms, they will divide and conquer us. They will continue to divide and conquer us. We have got to come together again as a civilizational people and get over these differences that they've been feeding us for centuries to keep us apart, to enslave us, to get us to the very state and condition that we're in. So there is a superstructure, there is a super organization, there is an immune system. It's the English civilization, right? Or the English speaking peoples, if you want to do that, because people are too offended about English, right? And we need to really come together around that as a unified whole in our own ways. You can still be Welsh and English and Scottish and Irish, and please do, or American, right? But we've got to come together here very quickly and very soon because the enemy is accelerating their divisions. And they're in all the most all, not so much exactly here in the United States anymore, but they're still embedded deeply here. And unfortunately, because of our political system, they could just wait out. They think they can wait out. Maybe they can. So we don't have a whole lot of time. They are accelerating. They do now, like particularly United Kingdom, have a lady now who is not English, has no loyalty to England, is now the head of MI5. That is the surest sign that blood is coming.
Yeah,
It's the surest sign.
I totally agree, and I think I'll do a different video this week about that because I know that on X and people that we follow, etc.,
Yeah.
are well aware of this. I appreciate that most people listening to this can be well aware of this. There are still millions and millions and billions maybe that have no idea of the implication of that, and
Yeah.
it's scary. It really
Yeah.
is. Um, I am on that note. Yes, I say I always like to give guests the opportunity. So how can people find you again? I'll put all these links in the show notes as well. But how
Yeah.
can people get in touch and follow your work?
Yeah. EM Burlingame books on Amazon and then emburlingame.substack.com. And which I'm actually doing a novel as a serial there called As Rome Burns. People might like because it goes back
Mhm.
800 years and brings it, it's all current, but it also goes back 800 years. And it goes into a lot of these concepts and ideas fairly deeply. And then Twitter, of course, right? I'm on X quite a bit. So those are the best places.
Awesome stuff. Well, I really enjoyed, say, predominantly listening to yourself and Will today. It's been absolutely fantastic. A lot of key points covered, and yeah, as you've said, a lot of quite negative things coming down the road. But I think as our civilization has shown that we will come out fighting and we will go through the other side and will likely come out
Prevail.
stronger somehow as well. So
Yeah, we'll
it's what we
prevail.
do.
And Will is one of those great thinkers of his time, of your guys' generation. And, he's still young and there's still like, hell, there's all kinds of things I still don't know because I'm only in my 50s. But he is one of those thinkers and he has got that historical thought as well. And so it gives me, not just him, but yourself and Ben Kelleran and others give me great hope and confidence that should we go ahead and take this fight on and get it over, that we will restore the English civilization on the other side, and we'll be in a lot better place than we've been in for at least a century, maybe 2, 3 centuries. So
I totally agree. Well, on that note, well, thank you very much. Take care, and we
yeah,
will make sure we catch up again soon.
all right.